Hi, my name is Renee Hobbs, and today is October 31st. Happy Halloween. I'm here with the amazing students of COM 416. The gallery view shows Jenna, Eric, and Candace are here with me today. What a incredible topic we have for our class this week. I hope you are enjoying the power of Nazi propaganda. State of deception as much as I am. It looks really clear from the flip grids that many of you really enjoyed watching the film Forbidden Films, and so really let's just share my screen with you, and we'll take it from here. I'm in the process now of looking at your flip grids, and so you can see when I look at them, I usually make a short comment about feedback and what I like and what I notice about your response. So that shows up. You can see the little icon below your post. So that's how you'll know it's there. So tonight's topic is chilling, and next week's is even more chilling, right? But we're examining power and persuasion in the racial state. And I chose as the image for tonight's class a still image from the Forbidden Films documentary that we watched that says, "Film is the educational tool to teach our young people." So we might as well start, like we often do, with looking at propaganda in the news, right? And of course, one of the things that we're seeing right now, we know that the Facebook and Twitter and Google executives are going to be meeting with the House Foreign Intelligence Subcommittee on Wednesday. That's tomorrow. And so there's been a lot of talk about that in the last week, right? So basically, this is a chance for the big media companies to weigh in on what they knew and when they knew it. But this is a really neat 4-minute NPR broadcast. I heard it on the radio, and then I tracked it down live. And it really was a very good orientation, especially to the way in which the Russians targeted people who were interested in the Black Lives Matter campaign, right? Which is like, whoa. And actually got more likes and shares, ironically, than a lot of actual organizations. So there's some startling stuff in this piece. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at it. And then, of course, the other big thing that happened in the news that you might have seen was Twitter responding to the propaganda in RT, Russia Today, and Sputnik, both government-controlled media outlets. And so Twitter's response is to sort of stop taking their money, right? And that's interesting, but it also raises a really interesting slippery slope, right? Because they're making an editorial decision here, and they're acting like a media company, but they're not really a media company, right? They're not regulated like a media company. They insist they're a platform company, but they're acting like a media company. So this week, I hope you'll get a chance to tune in to some of the news that's happening about the way in which the issues of the Russian propaganda that may have influenced the election, to see how that gets played out on different kind of media channels and different kind of contexts, because it's bound to be fascinating. It turns out that the volume of news media on propaganda has been like this throughout the whole semester. Have you noticed? It's sort of like you took this class and then whoosh, it became a big topic. So good for you for being on with a hot topic. I am sure, as some of you have noted in your tweets and in your other communication. This is going to be a fun topic for you to talk about with your family members at Thanksgiving. By Thanksgiving, I can guarantee you that you will be experts on this topic, and your family members will be riveted in finding out what you learned, and maybe in debating with you a variety of different topics. So I hope you have fun with that, and see the opportunity to pass along some of your knowledge to your families. So I don't know. Have you guys noticed any other media news that's handled the topic of propaganda?
I had retweeted something yesterday, and I didn't look too deeply into it, but there was a bunch of anti-Trump propaganda that was dropped over the city of Seoul, South Korea, by North Korea. And the only thing I had seen on Twitter was people had taken pictures of it and tweeted it, although I couldn't read what it said because it was in Korean. But there were some pieces of the propaganda that was just images of Trump being beaten or kicked to the ground or something.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting.
That is fascinating, and it is kind of like an old-fashioned style of technology, right? The leaflets floating down, thrown off of an airplane, right? That just seems so, I don't know, 20th century. But my guess is it works, right? Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing, Jenna. Anybody else come across any news about propaganda or propaganda in the last week?
I mean, I saw some propaganda with NFL this weekend.
Tell me about it.
So one of the Texans, Houston Texans, managers or whatnot, they were accused of talking about, using the term inmates in the asylum when referring to the members of their team that were taking a knee for the Black Lives Matter protest that's going on. And they made the connection that because this GM didn't support Barack Obama, that he's a racist, and it's been going viral. And granted, other members of the NFL have used that term in context, but they took it completely out of context and blew up this guy's spot. And basically, they're just trying to get this emotion across to the public that this guy is a racist because, virtually they wanted to get him out of there at first, but now they're using this as a segue by calling him a so-called racist when he was using inmates at the asylum as almost a figure of speech.
Sure, it's a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor, and so it's being used as a way to sort of attack him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And because it's a predominantly African American members of the team that are taking this knee, that they correlated it with him being the racist. So I found that kind of uneasy for me to really take that in, because it's it's an American pastime. It's something that we should view and not have to worry about that kind of situation. Yeah. And it's kind of unsettling.
Yeah. So as politics is now invading entertainment culture, right? Mm-hmm. And people are exploiting entertainment culture for political goals. I agree. It's unnerving. It's creepy. And it does kind of fit with some of the topics we've been talking about this week around this whole us, them, right? How easy it is to exploit us versus them. It's surprisingly easy and scary. So thanks for sharing. That's stunning, Alex. And I don't follow sports culture very much, and it's my husband is not a sports guy, so he doesn't follow it, and I don't follow it. So I'm actually super glad to hear about sports related, propaganda. In this case, it sounds like a really negative. Any other ways in which propaganda has crossed your screen in the last week, Eric?
Well, I just wanted to go back to the Texans things for a second. I respectfully disagree with Alex. The exact quote was, "We can't have the inmates running the prison," referring to them taking a knee and using their platform to provide they're now famous, and they're using that as a platform to teach about the social injustices for people who can't have a platform and don't have a voice. So when you're the owner of your team and your team is standing up for, like, trying to stand up for people who don't have that power, and you refer to them as inmates running the prison, those are supposed to be the people you stand behind.
Now, I do agree with I don't support the terminology by any means, like, whatsoever. But at the same time, I kind of feel for this guy because, like, sports commentator Shannon Sharp, who is an African American, has used this saying or expression in, the context of talking about players within the NFL. Now, it's McNair. I couldn't think of the name originally, but, he did support his players and said, take a knee, feel free. But as far as a GM, that's not something that you want your team to be doing, because although, they are standing up for something that's right, like, they're not necessarily doing that in a positive way for the viewers and for the children that are looking up to these people as role models.
It might be getting in the way of profits too, right?
Exactly.
Polarization there
Yeah.
that could affect, the bottom line.
Exactly.
Wow. Wow. Fascinating. So thank you for sharing two very different interpretations of the same event. And that really underlines one of the most important concepts in media literacy and one of the most challenging aspects of analyzing propaganda. People interpret messages differently based on our experience, our background, our culture, and our worldview. And so it really does come down to these judgments we make about, is this harmful or beneficial? And the answer is always, well, it depends, right? Because it's an interpretive process. And you gentlemen just illustrated the different interpretations that are possible of that same event. Fabulous. Any other propaganda that's crossed your event screen on your Facebook or your Twitter or your Instagram in the last 7 days? Okay, so let's go to doing some kind of synthesis of our reading for this week, right? So the thing we're focusing on this week is trying to understand the forms of propaganda and the concepts of effective communication that Hitler used in order to control public opinion and cultivate this us versus them thinking. That's really the theme of this week. And so what I'd like to do is ask you to work with a partner to explore at least 2 or 3 of these strategies or these phenomenon that are described in the readings. So as you talk it over with your partner, I want to see if you can describe what these concepts mean, and analyze how did these techniques control public opinion and cultivate us versus them thinking. So you're just going to take about 5 minutes with your partner. You're going to choose 1, 2, or more, at least 2, maybe 2 or 3 of these concepts. You're going to talk it over in relation to what do those concepts mean and how did they control how did those strategies control public opinion or cultivate us versus them thinking? So so before I go on, give me a thumbs up if you understand what we're going to do. We're just going to work in some small groups for just a few minutes, and I'm going to see if I can get those breakout rooms started. Really, there we go. You should be getting the invitation now. We'll just take about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and have some large group discussion. Okay, so I guess maybe what I'll do is I'll pause. Yay, you're back. Okay, so while you guys were in the breakout rooms, of course, I was checking out the Hitler timeline. The topic Hitler, the topic is, it's endlessly fascinating, right? So Hitler was not born in Germany; he was born in Austria, right? And of course, there is some really creepy gossip. Of course, he was struggling. He didn't do very well in school. He goes to art school. But he doesn't do very well there. He lives in poverty and he goes to political meetings, right? And then he gets into the war and he does really well in World War One. And he gets temporary blindness. I mean, this is like when he's a young man, right? He's your age, right? Then basically he starts speech making to the troops. He gets appointed to the intelligence propaganda section. He starts spying on other political parties, and he joins a anti-communist, anti-Semitic right-wing organization. Then he basically starts doing propaganda for the German workers' power, and basically founds the Nazi Party, goes to jail. Really interesting gossipy stuff about his girlfriend's daughter he might be romantically involved with. Then he wins like second place in the election, right? But he doesn't win, right? And then the daughter of the girlfriend was found dead in Hitler's apartment. Verdict, suicide. Then he becomes a German citizen. He goes back and he runs for election again, and he gets appointed chancellor because he comes in second place and he forms a coalition government. So part of the reason why while you guys were talking, I was reflecting on this really great resource. I'll put a link to it in our page today because there's also a really terrific lecture from British professor who examines Hitler's place in history, right? A whole nother related topic, because almost as soon as Hitler is elected, he takes down democracy, right? And he does it when it's almost like their version of the Congress, the Reichstag. It's where the political parties, where the government meets, is destroyed in a mysterious fire that to this day nobody knows how it got started, right? And of course, some people think the Nazis set fire to the German parliament because it became the sort of strong emotional event that allowed Hitler to basically declare a state of emergency and take down the institutions of democracy. So the first one, from my point of view, dismantling democracy happened perhaps through the use of arson, right? A fire, which is really intriguing to me, that a dramatic event could be used to justify the taking down of democracy. But let's take on the other topics that you might have discussed. Items 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Which one do you want to talk about? Explain and show me how it cultivated us versus them thinking or controlled public opinion.
Go
ahead.
For controlling the press, radio, and film, especially during the Olympics, Hitler stopped any racial anything racially provoked through the media outlets, and he also took down any anti-Semitic radio broadcasts and anti-Semitic posters. So that way, when the viewers were tuning in, and when the African American athletes came from the U.S. over there and started competing, they would feel comfortable with the situation, and in hopes to boost the overall demeanor that people had of the German population and Nazi Party.
it's a great example of he wanted the international people to have a certain impression, right? Because the international audience had been hearing terrible things, right? And so he deliberately altered reality to diminish that impression that this was that there was extreme racial prejudice happening, even though he also urged there to be not very much attention to Jesse Owens winning the fastest runner contest, right? So that is a great example of controlling the press. Thanks for sharing, Alex. What else?
Candace and I talked a lot about youth and how Hitler targeted them specifically. So if you look at obviously like the Hitler youth programs and things like that, that was his way of kind of recruiting them into his ideology and support of like his version of Germany. One of the pictures that I had posted in the Pathright activity that we did was of a picture of a children's book that was
Poisonous Mushroom?
Yeah. And it was an anti-Semitic book that was given to children just to introduce them into the idea that Jews are bad people. And they used, I think there was like a board game as well that was there. So Candace and I were talking about how being introduced to this type of ideology, children weren't really given the option to think on their own or to follow a different ideology. And at the same time, like parents couldn't express disagreement with the ideology of their Hitler youth groups or what schools were teaching them, because then they were seen as the enemy and they could be targeted.
Whoa, what a great point, Jenna, that parents weren't free to, sometimes when I would come home talking about stuff, my mom and dad would go, "Are you kidding me? That's ridiculous." And they would provide a counterpoint of view. But in this case, parents were kind of afraid to do that because the kid could turn in the parent.
Yeah, that was a point that Candace had made from the film, that they mentioned that children, if their parents didn't agree with them, they either had to convert them or turn them in.
Yeah,
they didn't really have any other options.
And that's the reference in the Forbidden Films to the Hitler youth quacks, right? Mm-hmm. Where we see the tension between the old-fashioned parent and the young Nazi kid, and we see the parent being very abusive. The father is slapping the kid around, and you sort of feel the resentment on the part of the teenager. You're really invited to identify with the teenager who wants to have modern and progressive, Nazi ideas, and the old-fashioned father. And we're almost encouraged to feel like the father, you should be. Social services should be called that. Father, So the youth thing is really a powerful example in the State of Deception exhibit, because you guys know that before it was a book, it was an exhibit at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. That's where I first saw the exhibit in 2007. There is a interview with an old man, a survivor, right? His name is Bob Baer, and he was a young Jewish German kid in the 1930s. And he said he was 9 years old, right? In 1933 or 1934. And he said it was so exciting during that period because parades would come down the street, and there would be flags, and there would be marching, and there would be bands, and there would be people in uniform. And he said, and it all looked so exciting. And when you're 9 years old, it's like there's a party going on in your neighborhood. And he went back to his house, and he said to his mom, "Heil Hitler!" And his mom was like, no, you're Jewish. You can't do that. And he didn't understand. He was 9 years old. He just wanted to be part of this exciting thing. And how to explain to a 9-year-old, no, you're not included. This party is not for you. And it was a really powerful story because it made me realize at 9 years old, you can't really, you've got to like the president. right? You got to like the president because it's like that's being 9 years old is what that's all about. So I'm glad you tackled the youth topic. Did you tackle any other topics? What other topics did you tackle? Candace, Eric, any other topics we can discuss?
I mean, me and Jenna kind of try to touch on each of them, but the one that resonated the most, she talked a lot about, and she said a lot what I said. But I mean, we touched upon the number 5 anti-Jewish campaigns in Crystal Rock, and it was briefly just because it was right before we had to go back. But we kind of touched upon how like this was one of the ways that, you know, it was another like us versus them, like, you know, Germany is struggling, but the Jewish are making money and they're not giving it back to the country, and this is what they deserve in that sense. And it kind of made you feel like, oh, like you're right, like the country is struggling. Why aren't they helping? They must not be like pro-German. So that kind of thing. So it definitely was just another continuation of us versus them. But we really only briefly talked about that. We were on a number 4 for quite a while.
You know, my husband has been like lurking in the background of my teaching this class all semester, right? When I was watching forbidden films, he was like, whoa. And he was like, Jude Seuss, that like period piece. It's like set during the time of the king and they're all wearing fancy clothes. He's like, I'd like to go see that. I'd like to see that. And I said, you know, Randy, you saw that it said it's like the worst piece of propaganda of all time. And that's the one everybody agrees should never be seen. Of course, it's on YouTube. So he tracks it down on YouTube. And I warn him, I say, look, honey, now that you watch this, the Nazi white supremacy stuff's going to follow you around the internet, right? Because like you watch that and like Google knows you watched it. Anyway, he watches it, right? And he's like completely absorbed by it. He's like completely absorbed by it. And then he starts telling me the plot. And it's so clear that the plot is basically Jews have all the money, take all of the power, exploit the poor Germans, all the prices raise because the Jews are ripping off everybody, right? And as he's talking this through, I'm like, shit, I don't know. It brings us to our question about whether or not these films really should be released to the public. But before we go there, I want to share so my husband had this one kind of dramatic response to Jude Seuss, which is he loved it. And it reinforced stereotypes about Jews and money that were really bad and awful, but they're in the culture and those films activate that stereotype. And for me, I had another experience with one of the films in the documentary, and I want to talk about that with you a little bit. Let me see if I can share my screen with you. Okay, so I just switched over to the site where the film is shown, and I'm just going to play a couple minutes of it before I talk about it with you, because this really got to me. I don't know how well that's actually playing with all this video here. Oh yeah, I can't play too much streaming video while I'm streaming video, you know what I mean? This is near the end of the documentary. There is an analysis of a film called I Accuse. And it's basically, it's about the issue of euthanasia and the murder of the 70,000 German people who were psychiatric patients or mentally ill or disabled from childhood. And of course, all those people were gassed, essentially. And the film features this dramatic story of a doctor and his wife, and his wife is getting multiple sclerosis, and she's declining, and she wants to die. And it's a really, like, I mean, look at the dialogue. Promise me, Thomas, if the illness is quicker than you, don't leave me alone. Don't speak. I couldn't bear it. Promise you will release me. Promise you will release me. It's a pretty chilling moment, and it does. It's not about may we shove all the crazies into the gas chambers. That it doesn't go that far, but what it does, according to the critique of the film, is that it's kind of soothing because it encourages people to like look away from this practice, right? And of course, this struck a really, really raw and nerve for me because about 1 year ago, my son Roger, age 28, died of a prescription drug overdose. He was a victim of what we now call the opioid crisis. And so I've been thinking a lot about death. I've been thinking a lot about medication. And I've been thinking a lot about pain. And I'm also thinking a lot about choice and human freedom. And, you know, this whole dynamic around euthanasia somehow connected to me the way in which our culture not wanting to deal with addiction and with the tragedies associated with addiction, and a lot of the kind of guilt and shame that people have about addiction. And of course, we're in the middle of that. Our family's been in the middle of that for the last year. So I've been thinking a lot about how the media culture, the entertainment films, and the way that media depicts addiction kind of shapes public opinion about it. And I wish, in a way, maybe next time I teach this class, I will kind of tackle that more deeply. Like how entertainment media, like movies and dramas and comedies, how they represent a form of propaganda. So this moment in the Forbidden Films just really, really brought up a lot of reflection for me. And I think over the next year, now we're at the 1 year anniversary, coming up to the 1 year anniversary of his death. I feel like in the next year, I hope to look more carefully at how ideas about addiction get represented in media in ways that could shape attitudes, including my own attitudes, right? Including my own attitudes. So in some ways that brings us to one topic that I feel like we probably need to talk a little bit about, because you guys, some of you did address it in your response to the question, should Nazi propaganda films continue to be banned in Germany, right? And that has to do with this question of diplomacy, rearmament, and territorial expansion. At the beginning of that documentary, we saw a film called Intolerance. We saw clips from that film, and that film shows what the storyline is. Essentially, the Polish people are being bad to the Germans. The Polish people are abusing the Germans, right? The Polish people are putting the Germans in prison and making the Germans into scapegoats, which is completely the opposite of how it was, but became a kind of justification, right, for this us-them thinking, like we had to defend ourselves. We had to defend ourselves, right? And I found the most chilling moment in that film to be the situation where the one German, he was a grown-up. He sort of said, oh, I never knew that about the Polish history, and I never knew that the Poles were the bad guy. And now I know that the Poles are the bad guy, it changes the way I think about history. It's like, so the guy watched a fiction film, and it was so powerful. It was such a powerful form of persuasion that, his actual knowledge of German history kind of got erased and replaced with the fictional version, right? So let's hear from you. Should the worst or the best, should the best of the propaganda films from the Nazi period be released to Germans? Why or why not?
I think it should be released to everybody, to be honest. I think that as far as an educational background, that's something that historically people need to understand and realize. And especially from like in a class like this, like we should have access to that. Do I think German children should be watching these movies? Probably not. But that being said, there's a lot of stuff out right now that children shouldn't be watching. So I think that maybe if it's released but regulated slightly as far for like education standpoint, I think that it's very beneficial, because we can't just act like this stuff didn't happen. And to see to watch these videos, you can almost learn, how to prevent it, or learn how to see stuff like this coming, because or the initial ways that the propaganda was used in the movies, and how we could relate it to things that we're watching now, and unwillingly the similarities between that and other things that are going on right now.
Cool. So Alex got a very strong pro position. Anybody else in the room have a different perspective?
I like, they did this screening of one of the movies in the film, and there was a Holocaust survivor there, and she talked about how she believed that it should be screened, but like in that circumstance where it's like a controlled environment. And I agree, that's how it should be done. Just because when you start, like, everyone deserves the right to see it. It is film. It is free speech. It is a good way to teach propaganda. It's a good way to like learn all about all of that stuff. But if you like start giving that to the public, and say like a young teenager doesn't know much about World War II or the Holocaust, and that's what they see right away, then that's the feeling they're going to get no matter what you tell them. And even if they do know about World War II and the Holocaust, maybe they're angry at someone and they watch that film, and like it can completely alter their mind. So it needs to be in like an area where it's controlled and like it's explained.
Right. Of course, I'm as a media literacy educator and activist, I'm kind of all in favor of a controlled setting. Would be one where you would be wrapping critical analysis and critical thinking around it. So Eric's position is kind of like the middle position. So we have Alex saying go, it should be released to the whole world. Eric adopting the middle position. Anybody going to adopt the no, it should stay the way it is right now, which they're banned?
I'm not, but I'm going to also agree with Eric that history can repeat itself if you're not given the necessary tools to learn from it. I think that if we're, like, example, if history is hidden from you, that's when, the same things happen again and again. And for better or for worse, I'm not saying by showing it it's going to be better, or not showing it's going to be worse, but I think by completely hiding it, you're completely negating the fact that people can learn from this.
Got it. So for you, the evil of keeping it banned is the problem that you want to solve. I think I kind of agree with you, and I'll tell you, yet I feel, I guess, here's what I'm afraid of. And I guess maybe this is a fear about the whole class and about my whole life in a way, right? I wonder if good propaganda, because it activates strong emotions and bypasses critical thinking and simplifies ideas and creates us versus them binaries, that it can't actually, that critical thinking doesn't really do any good against propaganda, right? because it's so strong. Because when the head and the heart are in a battle, the heart always wins, right? So I worry that we can't actually that propaganda is more powerful than our capacity to resist it. And so that's kind of what's keeping me up at night these days. And it also makes me think a lot about your own exposure to contemporary propaganda and also like what we end up talking about as a class. Last semester, we did a big deep dive on ISIS propaganda, and then I felt really guilty because I showed these great URI students all this ISIS propaganda, and I was like, what the fuck am I doing, right? You know, I could be indoctrinating them by accident. I can't control people's interpretation. Do I want to show you guys ISIS propaganda? I think not, right? And now we're going to be tackling the alt-right. Do I want to show you ISIS alt-right propaganda? I don't know. So, yeah, anyway, and it all makes me totally crazy. So I guess you kind of already knew that, right? So, enough said. But that being said, let me talk a little bit about what I want you to do next week. And then I want to talk about this really cool extra credit opportunity, which certainly will not apply to you because you guys are on my dream team for class participation. All right? You rock, right? But the other clowns who are watching this, the other students who are watching this, who are watching this recording, they might benefit from the extra credit opportunity. Of course, I hope you do as well. Let's just take a look at what we're doing. Next week, we're kind of finishing the book, right? We're not reading the whole book, but we're going to read the next big chapter, which is really about the gas chambers. And it's about how propaganda was used to justify, to permit, to enable the systematic murder of over 6 million Jews and other people. So we're going to really be really finishing reading the next 40 pages of State of Deception. And of course, you know that next week your leap 3 is also due. And we're steaming away to grade leap 2. Hopefully by next Tuesday, we'll have those grades back to you. So the participation activities next week are pretty simple. I have this already open here. What we'd like you to do for next week, the focus question is, how is propaganda used to deepen a sense of patriotism and nationalism and justify war against enemies? So you're going to be doing your research paper with your partner, and you're going to be doing exactly what you've been doing all along, which has been fantastic. You've been pulling out something that's interesting about what you're reading and including a picture to illustrate that idea. That being said, I just want to say a couple of words about Leap 3. Most of you have identified your partner, but not everybody has. And so that is, of course, great concern to me because this project can't be done as a solo production. You have to have a partner. There's 28 people in the class. It should all work out. And it looks like people are actually finding, oh, come on now, is that not moving down? Oh, there we go. Slowly, slowly, slowly. It turns out that most people are finding their partner. I've put people's emails here in case you need help with that. And you're welcome to use the Slack if you want to try the fun of a very powerful messaging tool in the workplace for that. Realize, just to underline this idea, that your Leap 3 is going to go on your blog, and each student needs to put that on their own blog, right? So you and your partner will both upload the paper and the infographic to your blog, and then you'll tweet out a link using the hashtag. So the deadline is next Tuesday, midnight, right? So don't freak out if you get one of those pingy messages from Pathright at 4 p.m. Midnight is the real deadline. So let me then talk a little bit about this really cool extra credit opportunity, which I'm pretty excited about. So I've had the great opportunity to go to Germany a couple of times this year, and one of my colleagues there, she's also teaching a propaganda class. Like, how bizarre, right? We're both teaching a propaganda class, but to different audiences, right? And so hold on here. So let me tell you a little bit about this cool opportunity. It's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So I think that's November 28th, right? So talk to students in Würzburg, Germany on a live Zoom call where we're gonna critically analyze 2 examples of propaganda. One from the United States and one from Germany. And it's going to be a 1-hour dialogue, and it's going to happen at 10 a.m. because that is like 4 p.m. their time, right? Because there's a 6-hour time difference. Because if we did it when my class meets, it would be like 4 p.m. Our Eastern time would be 4, 5, 6, 7. It'd be like 11 o'clock the German time. The Germans are out drinking then. That would really not be good. It would interfere with their social life, right? So instead, we'll do it in the morning here, and I think it should be a fun discussion. One of the things you may know that kind of just happened is, for the first time since the Nazi era, the Germans elected a far-right ultra-nationalist party called the AfD. This is a party that wants to close the borders, kick out all the immigrants, and become more German. And they won third place in the most recent election. So we might be actually looking at some examples of the AfD propaganda, and that would be cool. And then we might look at some one or 2 examples of the propaganda we see here in the United States, and have a kind of just hear how our culture shapes the way we interpret media messages. So I think it's going to be a great class. You can see there are some class participation points for joining. We'll still have our regular class on the 28th at 4 o'clock, but this is kind of like, I mean, who knows? You might make a new German friend, right? And wouldn't that be cool? College students in Würzburg, it's a great college town. You never know when having a friend in Europe could be a good thing. So anyway, so thanks for joining me. This is, we're signing off right at our 1-hour time. I'm really looking forward to seeing how you handle the Leap 3 project. I guess my suggestion is, like, have fun with it, right? Comparing the past and the present is a risky and dangerous and crazy thing to do. Whatever topic you take on, enjoy it. Enjoy the creativity that comes from working with a partner. And I'll see you guys next week, okay?
Bye.
Bye.